At my sister's wedding party, the name tag on my chair was the Black Sheep. Everyone laughed at me, so I stood up and disappeared. They never saw me again for the next 6 years. But when I returned, everyone's face turned pale. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Brian Edwards from Antigua. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I still remember the smell of lilies that night, thick and cloying, like they were trying to choke me. Emily's wedding was everything you'd expect from the golden child of the family, extravagant, polished, and dripping with pretense. The ballroom glittered under chandeliers that looked like they'd been stolen from a palace, and the guests buzzed like bees, their laughter sharp and hollow. I stood at the edge of it all, tugging at the collar of my rented suit, feeling like an intruder in my own family's world. They always made sure I knew I didn't belong. Samuel, don't slouch, my father, Richard, had snapped earlier that evening, his voice like a whip. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with eyes that could cut through steel. He built a construction empire, but to me, he was just the man who saw me as a disappointment. My mother, Margaret, had smiled that tight, practiced smile of hers, the one that said, just behave, Samuel, and don't embarrass us. Emily, my sister, was radiant in her white gown, her laughter echoing through the room. Mark, my younger brother, trailed behind her, smirking like he knew something I didn't. They were the perfect family. And me? I was the stain they couldn't scrub out. I tried to blend in, sipping champagne that tasted like regret, but every glance, every whisper, felt like a needle under my skin. Samuel, still figuring things out, a distant cousin asked, her tone dripping with pity. You know, Emily's already running Dad's company, and Mark's got that internship lined up. What about you? I mumbled something about freelance work, but her eyes glazed over, already moving on to someone more interesting. I was invisible, except when they needed someone to laugh at. The reception was worse. I found my seat at a table in the corner, far from the head table where Emily and her new husband glowed like royalty. My name tag was waiting for me, propped against a crystal centerpiece. But it didn't say Samuel. It said the Black Sheep. The letters were scrawled in cursive, mocking me with their elegance. I stared at it, my stomach twisting, hoping it was a mistake. But then I heard the laughter, sharp, cruel, slicing through the murmur of the crowd. Emily was pointing at me, her lips curled in amusement. Mark snorted, and even Richard let out a chuckle, his eyes glinting with that familiar disdain. Margaret just looked away, pretending not to notice. Lighten up, Sammy, Emily called, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. It's just a joke. You're always so sensitive. The guests around me laughed harder, their faces blurring into a sea of judgment. I felt my cheeks burn, my hands trembling as I clutched the name tag. It wasn't a joke. It was a declaration. I was the Black Sheep, the failure, the punchline, and they all knew it. I stood, the chair scraping against the polished floor, and the room seemed to tilt. You think this is funny? I said, my voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the laughter. Emily rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, Samuel. Don't make a scene. Richard's face hardened, his tone icy. Sit down, boy. You're embarrassing yourself. But I was done. Done with their cruelty, their condescension, their endless need to remind me I wasn't enough. No, I said, my voice steadier now. I'm done. You can all laugh at someone else. I turned and walked out, their voices fading behind me, replaced by the thud of my own heartbeat. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed in the tiny apartment I'd rented after dropping out of college. The walls were thin, the paint peeling, and the air smelled of mildew. But it was mine, the only place where I didn't have to hear their voices. I thought about every time they'd made me feel small, Richard's lectures about my lack of ambition, Margaret's sighs, Emily's smug comparisons, Mark's snide remarks. I thought about the time I tried to start a small business, and Richard had laughed, saying, stick to what you're good at, Samuel. Which isn't much. I thought about the birthdays they'd forgotten, the Christmases where I'd been an afterthought. And I thought about that name tag, the Black Sheep, burning itself into my memory. I couldn't stay. Not in this city, not in their shadow. I packed a small bag, just a few clothes, my laptop, and the last of my savings. The bus station was cold and empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I bought a ticket to a city I'd never been to, a place where no one knew me, where I could start over. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window at the fading lights of my hometown. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for sure. I would make them pay. One day, they'd regret laughing at me. One day, they'd see who the real black sheep was. The bus ride was long, the kind that made your bones ache and your mind spiral. I stared out the window as the city lights faded into darkness, replaced by endless stretches of highway and shadowed fields. The hum of the engine was the only sound, steady and monotonous, like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. I'd left everything behind, my family, my failures, my name tag that read The Black Sheep. But the weight of it all clung to me, heavy as the duffel bag at my feet. I didn't know where I was going, not really. The ticket said Brighton, a city I'd picked at random, but it felt like I was running toward nothing, or maybe toward something I couldn't name yet. Brighton greeted me with rain, the kind that soaked through your clothes and chilled you to the marrow. I stepped off the bus, my sneakers squelching on the wet pavement, and looked around. The station was small, its fluorescent lights flickering like they were about to give up. A few tired travelers shuffled past, their faces blurred by exhaustion. I pulled my hood up and started walking, the rain pelting my face, each drop a reminder that I had no plan, no connections, no safety net. I had $200 in my pocket, a laptop that barely worked, and a burning need to prove them wrong. Richard, Margaret, Emily, Mark. They laughed at me, mocked me, but I wouldn't let them win. Not this time. I found a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with peeling wallpaper and a neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. The clerk barely looked at me, just slid a key across the counter and muttered, "Room 12, no smoking." The room smelled of mildew and regret, the bed sagging under my weight. I lay there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and felt the silence press down on me. It was deafening, that silence, louder than the laughter at the wedding, louder than Richard's lectures. I closed my eyes, but all I saw was that name tag, The Black Sheep, burned into my mind like a brand. I had to start over, but where? How? The next morning, I walked the streets of Brighton, my stomach growling, my head pounding. The city was gray and industrial, its buildings squat and uninviting. I needed money, fast, so I took the first job I could find, washing dishes at a diner called the Rusty Spoon. The kitchen was hot and greasy, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon. My hands blistered from the scalding water, but I didn't care. It was work, and work meant I wasn't giving up. The other employees barely noticed me, just another face in the chaos, but that was fine. I didn't need their pity or their questions. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out who I was without my family's shadow. That's where I met Clara. She came in every morning, always at 7:15, always ordering black coffee and a blueberry muffin. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a voice that cut through the diner's noise. She wore tailored suits, her hair pulled back tight, and she carried herself like someone who knew exactly where she was going. I didn't think she'd notice me, just another dishwasher and a stained apron, but one day, she did. I was wiping down a table, my hands shaking from exhaustion, when she said, "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, kid. What's your story?" I froze, caught off guard. "No story," I mumbled, avoiding her eyes. But she didn't let it go. "Everyone's got a story," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Yours looks like it's eating you alive." I didn't want to talk, didn't want to spill my guts to a stranger, but something about her made me feel seen. Not judged, not pitted, just seen. So I told her bits and pieces, anyway. The wedding, the name tag, the laughter. I didn't mention Richard's cruelty or Emily's smugness, but I think she heard it in my voice, the way it cracked when I said, "They think I'm nothing." Clara didn't laugh, didn't sigh, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just nodded, her eyes narrowing like she was sizing me up. "You know," she said, "pain's a hell of a motivator. You can let it destroy you, or you can use it to build something. What do you want, Samuel?" I stared at her, my mind racing. What did I want? I wanted to prove them wrong, to make them pay, but I didn't know how. "I want to be someone," I said finally, my voice raw. "Someone they can't laugh at." She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Good," she said. "Then start small. Learn, build, and don't let them define you." She slid a business card across the table. "Clara Bennett, CEO of Bennett Tech. Come by my office next week. We'll talk." I took the card, my hands trembling, and watched her leave. The diner felt quieter after that, like the world had shifted under my feet. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of everything. I remember the first time I walked into Clara's office, the glass door swinging shut behind me with a soft click that felt like a promise. The building was sleek, all steel and glass, the kind of place that screamed success. I felt out of place in my worn jeans and scuffed sneakers, my hands still rough from dishwater at the rusty spoon. But Clara didn't seem to notice. She sat behind a mahogany desk, her eyes sharp as ever, and gestured for me to sit. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair, "you want to be someone. Let's see if you've got what it takes." I didn't know it then, but that moment was the spark that lit the fire. The fire that would burn down everything my family thought they knew about me. Clara didn't sugarcoat it. She told me straight up that success wasn't handed out like candy. It was fought for, bled for, earned through sweat and sleepless nights. "You've got potential, Samuel," she said, her voice steady. "But potential's just a seed. You need to water it, nurture it, or it'll rot in the dirt." She gave me books to read, business strategy, tech trends, biographies of people who'd clawed their way up from nothing. I devoured them, staying up late in my motel room, the pages lit by a flickering lamp. I started seeing patterns, connections, ideas that felt like lightning in my veins. I wanted to build something big, something they'd never see coming. It started small, like Clara said. I quit the diner and took a freelance gig coding for a startup, my fingers flying over the keyboard, the screen glowing in the dark. The pay was better, but the hours were brutal. I'd work until my eyes burned, then collapse on my sagging bed, dreaming of code and algorithms. But it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I wanted to create, not just fix other people's messes. So I started sketching out an idea, a sustainable energy app, something that could track and optimize power usage for homes. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but Clara believed in it. "It's risky," she said, looking over my plans, "but risk is where the magic happens. Go for it, Samuel." I did. I poured everything into that app, my savings, my time, my sanity. I rented a tiny office above a laundromat, the smell of detergent seeping through the walls, and worked day and night. There were setbacks, of course. Investors laughed me out of their offices, saying I was too green, too unproven. The app crashed during demos, and I spent hours debugging, my frustration boiling over. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought of that name tag, the black sheep, and the laughter that followed me out of Emily's wedding. I thought of Richard's sneer, Margaret's silence, Emily's smugness, Mark's disdain. They called me nothing. I'd show them I was everything. 5 years later, my company, Brightspark, was a name people knew. We got national, our app downloaded by millions, our logo plastered on billboards and tech blogs. I'd moved out of the motel into a sleek apartment, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Brighton's skyline. I married Jamie, my rock, the one who'd seen me at my lowest and believed in me anyway. They helped manage the company's growth, their calm balancing my fire. I built a new family, 2 colleagues who respected me, friends who celebrated my wins. But the old family, the one I'd left behind, was never far from my mind. I saw their faces in every victory, every headline, and I knew they'd see them too. They'd see, and they'd choke on their laughter. Back in my hometown, things were falling apart. I'd hear snippets from mutual acquaintances, bits of gossip that made my blood run cold. Richard's construction empire was crumbling, bad deals and lawsuits piling up like bricks. Emily's marriage had imploded, her boutique on the brink of bankruptcy. Mark had vanished, estranged from the family, his gambling debts a whispered scandal. And Richard was sick, some kind of cancer, the kind that ate you from the inside out. Their perfect little world was cracking, and part of me felt a twisted satisfaction. They laughed at me, mocked me, but now they were the ones falling. Now they were the ones who needed help. I didn't reach out. Why would I? They hadn't cared when I left, hadn't called, hadn't even sent a text. They'd let me disappear, assuming I'd crawl back, broken and defeated. But I hadn't. I'd built an empire, brick by brick, and now I was someone. Someone they couldn't ignore. Someone they couldn't laugh at. I looked out over Brighton's skyline, the city lights glittering like stars, and felt a fire in my chest. This was just the beginning. I'd show them what it meant to be the black sheep. I'd show them what it meant to be me. And when I did, they'd wish they'd never laughed at all. I remember the weight of the car keys in my hand, cold and heavy, like they carried the gravity of everything I'd become. The luxury sedan purred under me, its leather seat smooth against my tailored suit, a far cry from the bus seat I'd sat in 6 years ago, rain-soaked and desperate. I was driving back to my hometown, back to the place I'd sworn I'd never return, and the road stretched out like a scar across my memory. I'd heard the rumors through a mutual acquaintance. Richard was sick, dying maybe, and the family was falling apart. Part of me wanted to stay away, to let them rot in their own mess. But another part, the part that still saw that name tag, the black sheep, every time I closed my eyes, wanted to see their faces when they realized who I'd become. I wanted to see them choke on their laughter. The town hadn't changed much. The same tired streets, the same faded storefronts, the same air of stagnation. But I pulled up to the family home, a sprawling house that used to feel like a prison, its white columns now chipped, the lawn overgrown. I stepped out of the car, my polished shoes clicking against the pavement, and felt the weight of their eyes on me before I even reached the door. I didn't knock. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking, and stepped into the living room. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and despair, and there they were, Richard, Margaret, Emily, Mark, frozen like statues, their faces pale as ghosts. Richard was in a wheelchair, his once broad shoulders hunched, his face gaunt and gray. The man who'd towered over me, his voice like a whip, was now a shadow, his eyes sunken but still sharp. Margaret stood behind him, her hands fluttering like nervous birds, her smile tight and forced. Emily was by the window, her designer dress hanging loose on her frame, her eyes darting between me and the floor. Mark slouched on the couch, his hair greasy, his shirt stained, looking like he'd aged a decade in 6 years. They stared at me, their silence louder than the laughter at the wedding, and I let it hang there, heavy and suffocating. "Samuel," Margaret finally said, her voice trembling, too sweet, too desperate. "We didn't expect you. Look at you, successful, handsome. We've missed you." I almost laughed. Missed me? They'd let me disappear, hadn't called, hadn't cared. Now they missed me, now that I was someone. I didn't respond, just looked at Richard, his eyes meeting mine, a flicker of recognition, then fear. "You look good, boy," he said, his voice raspy, weak. "Heard about your company. Bright Spark, right? Big name now." I nodded, my face a mask, my voice cold. "You heard right. I'm here because I heard you were sick. Thought I'd see for myself." Emily stepped forward, her hands twisting together, her voice shaky. "Samuel, we're so glad you're back. Things have been hard. Dad's illness, the business, my boutique. Maybe you could help." I cut her off, my tone sharp as a blade. "Help? You think I owe you help? After what you did?" Mark flinched, his eyes dropping, but Emily pressed on, desperate. "It was a joke, Samuel. The name tag, it was stupid. I know, but we didn't mean." I laughed then, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the room. "Didn't mean it? You laughed at me. All of you. You made me feel like nothing. And now you want my help?" Richard coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and spoke, his voice strained. "We were wrong, Samuel. I was wrong. I pushed you too hard. I know that now. But we're family. Family helps each other." I stared at him, the man who'd called me a failure, who'd laughed at my dreams, and felt nothing but ice. "Family," I said, my voice low, dangerous. "You stopped being my family the moment you laughed at me. But fine, I'll pay for your treatment. Not because I owe you, but because I want you to live long enough to see what I'm going to do next." They stared at me, their faces pale, their eyes wide, and I felt the power shift, heavy and undeniable. They were desperate, dependent, and I was the one holding the strings. Margaret tried to speak, her voice pleading, but I turned and walked out, their voices fading behind me. I got back in my car, the engine roaring to life, and drove to a hotel on the edge of town. The room was sterile, cold, but it felt like a fortress. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone silent, and thought about what I'd seen. Their fear, their desperation, their lies. They thought I was here to save them. They had no idea I was here to destroy them. And when I did, they'd wish they'd never laughed at me. They wish they'd never called me the black sheep. I woke to the buzz of my phone, a relentless vibration that cut through the silence of the hotel room. The screen glowed in the dark, 78 missed calls staring back at me like a challenge. Emily, Mark, Margaret, they'd left voicemails, their voices spilling out in a desperate flood, begging for forgiveness, for help, for mercy. Samuel, please. Emily's voice cracked, high and frantic. We need you. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. Mark's was slurred, thick with desperation. Come on, man. We messed up, but we're family. You can't do this. Margaret's was the worst, her tone pleading, fake sweet, like she thought she could charm me back. Samuel, sweetheart, we love you. We always have. Please, come home. I listened to every one, their words like knives twisting in my chest, but not because I cared. Because I remembered. I remembered the laughter, the name tag, the black sheep, the years of silence when they'd let me disappear. They didn't love me. They loved what I could give them now. And I'd give them something, all right. Just not what they expected. I deleted the voicemails, one by one, my finger pressing hard against the screen, and felt a cold clarity settle over me. They thought they could beg their way out of this, thought their apologies could erase the past. But apologies were cheap, and I wasn't buying. I stood, pacing the room, the carpet rough under my bare feet, and started planning. I'd paid for Richard's treatment, not out of kindness, but to keep him alive long enough to see what I'd do next. To see their empire crumble, brick by brick, just like they'd crumbled me. I sat at the desk, my laptop glowing in the dark, and began to dig. I'd built Bright Spark into a powerhouse, and now I'd use that power to destroy them. They'd laughed at me, mocked me, called me nothing. Now they'd see what nothing could do. I started with Richard. His construction empire was already teetering, but I wanted it in ashes. I had contacts. Journalists, lawyers, private investigators, and I used them. I leaked documents, emails, proof of his shady deals, bribes he'd paid to cut corners, permits he'd forged. The headlines hit the next day, screaming across the front pages. Local businessman faces fraud allegations, Richardson's empire under fire. I watched from my hotel room, the TV flickering, and saw his face on the screen, gaunt and gray, his eyes wide with panic. The lawsuits piled up, creditors circling like vultures, and I knew he'd never recover. He'd built his life on power, and now I'd stripped it away, leaving him exposed, humiliated, just like he'd done to me. Emily was next. Her boutique was already failing, but I wanted it gone, erased, like she'd tried to erase me. I bought it out through a shell company, my name hidden behind layers of paperwork, and shut it down. I watched from across the street as the closed sign went up, Emily standing in the doorway, her hands pressed against the glass, her face crumpling. She'd laughed at me, called me sensitive, but now she was the one crying. I felt a twisted satisfaction, cold and sharp, as I turned away. She'd wanted to be the golden child, the perfect daughter. Now she was nothing, just like she'd said I was. Mark was easier. His gambling debts were a ticking bomb, and I lit the fuse. I leaked the details to a local gossip site, the kind that thrived on scandal, and watched the fallout. Local man drowns in debt, the headline read, his name plastered across the screen. He tried to hide, but the town was small, and gossip spread like wildfire. I saw him once, shuffling down the street, his head down, his eyes hollow. He'd smirked at me at the wedding, joined in the laughter, but now he was the punchline. I didn't feel pity. I felt power, the kind I'd never had, the kind they denied me. They came to me, of course, desperate and broken. Emily and Mark showed up at my hotel, their faces pale, their voices shaking. Samuel, please, Emily said, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands twisting together. You've ruined us. My boutique, Mark's reputation. How could you do this? Mark stepped forward, his voice hoarse. We were jealous, okay? We were stupid. But you're going too far. We're family. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the lobby. Family, I said, my voice low, dangerous. You stopped being my family the moment you laughed at me. You think I'm going too far? You haven't seen anything yet. Jamie called that night, their voice soft, worried. Samuel, I know they hurt you, but this isn't you. You're better than this. I stared at the phone, my chest tight, and felt a flicker of doubt. But then I remembered the name tag, the laughter, the silence. No, I said, my voice steady. They made me this. And now they'll pay for it. I hung up, my hands trembling, and looked out at the city skyline, the lights flickering like embers. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I destroyed them, piece by piece, until they wished they'd never laughed at me. Until they wished they'd never called me the black sheep. I remember the hospital smell, antiseptic and sterile, clinging to my skin as I walked down the hall. Richard's room was at the end, the door half open, the beep of machines cutting through the silence. I hadn't planned to see him again, not after everything I'd done, but something pulled me there, a twisted need to look him in the eye one last time. He was lying in the bed, his body frail, his face a map of shadows and regrets. The man who'd towered over me, his voice like a whip, was gone, replaced by this hollow shell. But his eyes, they were still sharp, still piercing, and when they met mine, I felt the old anger flare, hot and raw, like a wound that wouldn't heal. "Samuel," he rasped, his voice weak, barely a whisper. "You came." I stood at the foot of the bed, my hands clenched, my suit crisp against my frame. I didn't sit, didn't soften. "Not for you," I said, my voice cold, steady. "I came to see the end." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and tried to sit up, his hands trembling. "I was wrong," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "I pushed you too hard, judged you too harshly. I was a terrible father. But you were always the strongest, Samuel. I see that now." I stared at him, his apology hanging in the air like smoke, and felt nothing but ice. "You think that means anything?" I said, my voice low, dangerous. "You think words can fix what you did? You laughed at me, mocked me, called me nothing. You made me the black sheep. And now you want forgiveness? It's too late, Richard. You're too late." His eyes widened, a flicker of fear, and I leaned in, my voice a blade. "I paid for your treatment to keep you alive long enough to see this. To see what I'm going to do next. You built your life on power, on control, and I'm going to tear it all down. You, Margaret, Emily, Mark, you're going to wish you'd never laughed at me." I turned and walked out, his coughs echoing behind me, his pleas fading into silence. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd seen what I came to see, and now it was time to finish it. I started with Richard's business, the last piece of his crumbling empire. I used Brightspark's resources, my contacts, my power, and bought it out through a shell company, my name hidden behind layers of paperwork. I liquidated it, asset by asset, watching the numbers drain like blood from a wound. The headlines screamed the next day, "Richardson's construction empire dissolved. Local family loses everything." I saw Margaret on the news, her face pale, her hands shaking, as she tried to explain, tried to salvage something. But there was nothing left. I'd taken it all, stripped them bare, just like they'd stripped me of my dignity. Emily and Mark were next. I'd already ruined their lives, but I wanted more. I blacklisted them, used my connections to ensure no one in town would hire them, no one would help them. Emily tried to start over, begging for jobs, but doors slammed in her face, her name poison. Mark tried to hide, but the gambling debts followed him, creditors hounding him like wolves. I saw them once, moving into a rundown apartment on the edge of town, their faces hollow, their eyes empty. The family home was gone, sold to pay debts, its white columns now someone else's dream. They'd laughed at me, mocked me, but now they were the ones broken, the ones humiliated. And I felt a cold satisfaction, sharp and final, as I watched them fall. Jamie tried to stop me, their voice soft, worried, when I got back to Brighton. "Samuel, I know they hurt you, but this isn't you. You're better than this." I stared at them, my chest tight, and felt a flicker of doubt. But then I remembered the name tag, the laughter, the silence. "No," I said, my voice steady. "They made me this, and now they've paid for it." Jamie looked away, their eyes sad, but they didn't argue. They knew I was done, knew I wouldn't stop. I'd built an empire, brick by brick, and now I'd used it to destroy them. To destroy the family that had destroyed me. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, the city skyline stretching out before me, the lights flickering like embers. Brightspark was stronger than ever, my name on billboards, my face on magazine covers. I'd won. I'd shown them what it meant to be the black sheep, what it meant to be me. They'd laughed at me, mocked me, called me nothing, but now they were nothing. And I was everything. I felt a cold satisfaction, final and unyielding, as I looked out at the city. I destroyed them, piece by piece, and I wouldn't stop there. I'd never let anyone hurt me again. I'd never let anyone laugh at me. I'd built my empire, and now I'd defend it, no matter the cost. Because I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was Samuel, and I was unstoppable. That's Samuel's story, the black sheep who became unstoppable, turning pain into power. What did you think? Did he go too far, or did they deserve it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take. If this story hit you, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell for more audio stories like this. Quick question, would you forgive or burn it all down like Samuel? Comment below, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, you're not defined by where you start, but by what you build. Until next time, stay unstoppable. See you soon in our next story.